Welcome to another episode of Wandering Thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the last one on thinking, and that there was something there amongst all of that of value potentially. Today I am sitting on the top of a hill in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, which is a beautiful forested and mountainous region, looking down upon forest, both open grazed farmland and forested land, and I'm surrounded by a eucalypt plantation, which to a more purist rainforest individual may seem abhorrent, but is, I think, quite beautiful. It's a bit of a cloudy and overcast day again, as it seems to be at this time of year, but still lovely. It means I won't get burnt out here. So for today's topic, I was thinking of dwelling on something that has strikingly entered our lives and become such a critical, ubiquitous, and normal part of our lives now. It's not really something that we comment on or think about anymore. It's just there, and that thing is social media, which really is a fascinating phenomenon. And ironically, the means likely by which you are receiving this podcast. So there's a few things to touch on here, and a few ways of going about looking at this topic, which we'll explore. I think just to kick it off, it's worth doing so with a quote from a favorite author of mine, Sam Harris, who's also a moral philosopher and neuroscientist, who has said in the past that social media is an experiment which we've all been thrown into, but which we didn't sign up for, and which we do not yet know the consequences of. And that was some time ago now, but that still very much holds true today. I think we still do not really know what the consequences are of this new form of communication and mode of existence in some sense, and probably we won't know until it's all said and done. And those consequences will keep arising across time as we develop our use of social media, the way we interact with it, and the way it enters our lives and evolves in how it becomes a part of our lives. So it might be worth just considering for a second just how fundamentally different life was before social media. I think for the younger generation, myself included, it's very much been quite a normal part of adolescent and mature life. But before social media, it was just a different story. Like, if you wanted to communicate with someone, typically in any fashion, you'd have to send a letter, or you'd have to fax someone, and that could take months, days, weeks, or months to communicate with whoever it is you were wishing to communicate, either in your country or in another country. There was no ability to quickly just snap out a quick message, ask a quick question, send an email, post a photo, share an experience with someone, or create an experience for someone else to experience on a platform, effectively at a drop of a hat. We were very much more confined to our own locale in terms of who we could speak to, what we knew, and how we were able to engage with the world. And how that has changed us, I think, is quite a fascinating question, which I'm sure we'll delve into more, will be uncovered more thoroughly as we go on. But to consider, for example, that if you wish to communicate with someone in the past, say via a letter, then that communication was going to be something that you were going to carefully construct and write and put some real thought into before doing that. To summarize, when writing a letter, you would be more inclined to create a more thoughtful and considered response either to a letter that you had received or just to begin a conversation with someone else than you would now. And the significance of that for the nature in which we communicate with others and think about others and just think as people, I think I'm not sure to what extent that's been explored, but it's likely quite profound. I suspect that a consequence of that, just sort of loosely speaking at a cultural level, is a proclivity to simply blurt out what it is that we think or would like to say at any given moment, because it's just so easy and very much without consequence in some sense. For example, today you can simply, let's say you're having a conversation with someone and you're having a conversation with them online, and probably most saliently to this topic, most relevant, is you're having an argument or a disagreement. Now, when you have an argument or a disagreement in person, there are certain rules to the game, you might say, or certain just parameters that help to shape and guide that conversation or that argument. Say in the form of actually being there in front of a person, making eye contact, there being body language, you having to confront in the moment the consequence of whatever it is you're saying and how that makes that person react. And likewise for the other person. It's a lot harder to yell at or to insult someone face to face than it is to do so online. You can metaphorically scream at someone online much more easily than you can in person, and it's much more clear when you're doing damage to someone, when you're hurting their feelings, when you're upsetting them. And then likewise, on the other side of the coin, when you're making them happy or when you're pleasing them, when you're bringing joy to them in whatever sense. And then not to mention the fact of body language. When we're thinking about communication, it truly is. It's not all body language, but my God, it is very much body language. Your body language, you can speak the same sentence with different, well, not just body language, with different types of, say, eliciting different kinds of body language, but perhaps just as importantly or more importantly, with a different tone of voice. Your tone of voice will implicitly convey a sense of meaning beyond the words themselves that you just cannot get through text, through pixels on a screen that present themselves in the form of letters, that present themselves in the greater form of sentences, and then whatever meaning is implicit purely in those words, which the rest of you have to interpret and hope that the context is well known enough and and grounded enough and established that you know how to interpret those words. So in that sense, social media has just changed the way in which we fundamentally are able to communicate with each other and are inclined to communicate with each other. It's not just the case that communication is often suffers from social media, through the medium of social media. It's that it facilitates an ease of communication of that certain manner. Like, it inclines us to be able to just throw away our words and to throw away our meaning, and to potentially say things, or not to potentially, to say things in a way that we just wouldn't do so in person, and to potentially corrupt our relationships, and to not give rest to things that need space. I think a classic example of this is relationships. It's so easy to keep picking at and prodding at a bad situation when you have social media, when you're able to just throw out a message, when you're able to say whatever you want to in that message, because it's not in person, and so it's much easier to just do so, and you can just spam and spam and spam. So anyway, I guess that's just the beginnings of a little bit of context of social media. The level of connectedness is maybe what I was trying to get at first, but sort of went off on a bit of a tangent there. Social media, connectedness versus non-connectedness. Social media has undoubtedly made us more connected. In his book, Enlightenment Now, I think published back in 2016 or perhaps 15, the cognitive scientist Steven Pinker made the point that, and referenced several studies that showed that we have become more connected through social media, and that's obvious. Of course we have. As I was just saying, we can message someone, we can communicate with someone at the click of a button, the swipe of a screen, and it's allowed us to have more experiences with others, and to share more with others, and to be in touch more with others, our friends, our loved ones, and than ever before. And it's hard to see how that implicitly is in any way negative. But of course, that's not the whole story. There's clearly more there. All of us know on some level, or experienced on some level, the negative attributes or the negative outcomes that come from social media. And there's a few reasons for that. Well, there's plenty of reasons for that, which perhaps we'll go into. So there's a few things that social media has done to us and our world. As I was mentioning just before, the means by which we communicate has changed with social media, and it's changed to a format which we are not well equipped for and which we are not familiar with. This absence of in-person connection, a lack of tone when it comes to voice, a lack of perception when it comes to body language, and a lack of consequence when it comes to your actions. It requires us to distill the underlying meaning behind words and ideas and sentences from just, as I said before, a few bits of text and perhaps some symbols in the form of emojis. And that's something that we're just simply not equipped for. The room for error there is incredible, and it extends beyond that, in that the dynamics, the rules of a conversation are absent. It's not a situation of where I speak, this elicits a response in you that's visible for the most part to both of us, you can either interject and build off or argue against what I was just saying, and we can bounce off each other, and there's the general, typically the sort of there's a level of understanding, empathy and compassion, and the ability to know when a conversation is going well or poorly, and whether or not you should continue that conversation, and how you should steer that conversation, that is simply absent from social media. And this is why we just fail to reach anyone there. We fail to, you could say, reach the other side, per se. The other side just being anyone that has a different opinion than you. Anyone who's familiar with the old days of Facebook in particular, or Twitter now, will have seen or even participated in situations where you get a thread of 100 comments of two people going back and forth at each other, speaking over each other, ignoring what the other person has said, and just there being no natural conclusion to that situation. It is impossible to win if winning is the outcome that you're looking for, although that's probably not the best way of thinking about any form of conversation and sharing of ideas. You just can't reach the other person. They're locked in, and so are you. And there's no, again, consequence to what you're doing. And there's none of the emphatic, effective forces at play that might make you amenable to the other side. It's just a constant fuck you, back and forth. And it's just horrible. Long ago came to the conclusion that there's just simply no point in trying to converse publicly on a platform like that like these platforms about anything. Even having a conversation with friends in a chat, in a messenger, is the same thing. You just bombard each other with essays and just speak past each other, and something that you can do is you can construct a response that you just wouldn't be able to in person. And so that bends the rules in some sense, that changes the nature of the game, and it doesn't allow things to come to their conclusion. And because you're not reaching the other person, you just become angry, and the other person just becomes angry, and you just become frustrated, and suddenly, for probably not much reason at all, you've just if you haven't lost a friend, you've just ruined your opinion of someone. You've ruined your opinions of each other when you didn't need to, or you've at least damaged that relationship. So that's one point on social media that's worth, I think, recognizing and maybe dwelling on, is the futility of conversing in that sense. Conversing unless it's inherently positive and relatively neutral. If there's a point to be taken away from anything that I've said up to this point, it's that, and it's one that I'm sure that most of you are aware of. Some people like to say that Twitter is the public square. It's where, for our culture, for Western culture and democracy, and where ideas are shared, and where it's the marketplace of ideas is able to be manifested and debated. And that's just bullshit. The only one that thinks that Twitter is a community square or is productive for making progress on topics or important issues is someone who uses Twitter and doesn't see that they're just another one of these people engaging in futile conversations. And not only are they futile, they bring out the worst in us. It seems so clear. We have this tendency on social media to become dismissive, to become patronizing, to just ignore what the other person said, to misrepresent what they said because it's just so easy, and to just be an asshole when it comes down to the crux of things. It's just to become a smug fucking asshole. So maybe we'll move on from that point now. Relevant to what I guess we've just spoken to in some extent is how social media has allowed for the proliferation of news and information. Perhaps more importantly, though, misinformation. And there's a few reasons for this. It's not necessarily inherent to media, but it's to social media, but it's just inherent to media. And before that, if we're looking at it from a first principles perspective, it's just inherent to our human nature. And that is the fact that we are drawn to certain things. Fundamentally, we are drawn more, our attention is drawn more to some things than to others. So back in the days of old media, legacy media, newspapers, perhaps still on the internet, with online paper outlets, headlines that are typically negative and that grab our attention, that are interesting in some way, and that they are emotionally valenced or politically valenced, and that are what we call sensationalist now, grab our attention far more than something that is more neutral or positive and just generally, say, fact-based. Well, not necessarily fact-based. You can have fact-based negative information, but it's those things that are construed to speak to the emotional centers in our brains are the ones that get the most attention. And fundamentally, social media is a phenomenon of attention. And it has a business model. What its life support, its blood, is attention. Without attention, there's no social media. And so unfortunately, that creates a perverse incentive on our social media platforms to proliferate news, ideas that are negative, and that are often they're negative in a way that isn't representative of the truth of a situation, or their availability, speaking to our availability bias here, the availability of negative information, that is the amount of negative information that is produced by media because of our tendency to be drawn towards negative information, creates the misperception that the world is, let's say, colored by whatever this negative aspect is, this negative story. This was true, for example, during the year of 2020, with the death of George Floyd and everything that ensued with that. That video and a few others seemed to highlight and create this idea that America's police force was completely corrupt, bigoted, racist, and inept, and that crime was on the rise, and that black deaths were on the rise, etc. When in fact the opposite to all of these things were true, were more true than those propositions. It's just that they don't make the media, and the absence of a crime doesn't make the media in the way that the presence of a crime does. So in that sense, social media has taken a natural proclivity of ours and something that was provided by original media, and then just supercharged it to hell by providing constant, an infinite amount of news sources and an infinite ability to access those news sources, and to construct in a way that cannot be regulated and does not adhere to, say, some of the older principles of journalism that were more true for the past. So social media has allowed us to be more connected and to be more aware of what's going on, but it's also then biased us towards a more negative understanding and view of the world. Whatever grabs our attention, whatever speaks to our emotions and to our values and to our political beliefs, and it also simplifies. It needs to simplify the world to do this into sensationalist headlines, and so it simplifies our understanding of the world. And in a complex world, and the more we try to simplify it, and the more we're likely to run into error with one another. And beyond that, it's fragmented I said that social media was an attention machine. Its lifeblood was attention. But our attention is able to be very quickly, our attention is able to be gamed. Let's think about that. We are subject to things that are interesting, immediately grabbing our attention from one moment to the next, and that things that are rewarding to perceive and for our attention to be on, to elicit a reward and reinforcement response in our brain, in our dopaminergic system, giving us that slight positive, happy feeling. It may not. Let's take an example. You're scrolling on Instagram. You're looking at Instagram. Why are you doing that? Well, firstly, because fundamentally, your brain wants to be interested. It wants to perceive interesting things. And you might think that Instagram reels are not that interesting, really. But in some sense they are, in that they're these little high resolution, high bandwidth images, videos, stories images and videos contain stories and ideas and actions and events and emotion and people and all sorts of things that immediately stimulate us and which we can just witness from a screen, and that rush us with this little flood of like attention stimulus. And so we are drawn to that, whether or not we're consciously aware of it or not. And not only are we drawn to that, but we're continually drawn to it. As soon as it's done, we want more, because as I said, it activates our reinforcement system in our brains, which effectively means that we are inclined to continue to do that thing. That's the whole reason why we have a reward system. It's to incline us to do certain things, typically that have been good for our survival in the past, but which now can be gamed by these little highly stimulating episodes, which are just, let's say, reels or photos or videos that, again, contain something that is mentally stimulating and that we can constantly want more of. Once we're finished with one, we feel the absence of that, and then we want another, and we want another, and another, and another, and then that builds an addiction in some sense to that reward cycle and that stimulus, which is why we are constantly reaching for our phones again and mindlessly scrolling, even if we don't know why we're doing it. We catch ourselves thinking, fuck, I've just been on my phone for 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I can't even remember a single thing that I looked at. Why have I done this? So social media steals, in its particularly in its more modern incarnation, steals our attention, and everything is trying to steal your attention. And the way that it is going to steal your attention is by providing the most stimulus in the shortest amount of time. And so what that's done is fragmented our attention span. It's brought it down to that of a few seconds, really, and has inclined it towards things that frankly aren't very interesting, aren't very informative, and aren't very helpful, and aren't very good for us. Now, beyond that, it creates, social media is a hallucination. Something I heard recently is called a hallucination machine, and that's clearly the case. It creates, for many of us, and particularly for those who have a prominent standing on social media, it creates this typically a false idea of who this person is, but typically more importantly, what they've said and what they've done. Because it's so easy to take, let's say, a clip of something that someone has said, or typically, let's say, in the broader context of a longer conversation, and to cut that out and to spread that in a way that suits a certain agenda and suits a certain purpose, to tag that with a certain sensationalist headline, something that's going to grip your attention, but it isn't necessarily true, and then to just throw that out there, and for that to be done en masse. And I know from personal experience how this has corrupted friends' views of certain people, because most of us don't really care about many things or take many things seriously, really, if we're being honest. Things that we have, even things that we like to have opinions upon and think that we have opinions upon and that are important to us. But we don't really want to take the time to actually try to know or understand something. And so it's far easier to instead perceive a plethora of content, let's say videos, titles, headlines, images that support a preconceived notion about something, let's say about a person, let's say that's negative, that you have about things that they say or they think or they've done, and to just build your opinion from that, and to not even necessarily watch those videos that have been misappropriated, just to read the headlines, and then again the availability, let's say the extent to which you seem to experience and see the presence of those things, determining in your mind that, well, that must just be the case everywhere and all the time. That must just be the truth. Which is certainly, this is maybe a bit more of a niche comment for those of us interested in certain public figures and intellectuals and online, although it's true for broader ideas and happenings in the world. And it creates this quick division amongst us, and amongst people, with easy throwaway arguments for why someone's bad. Why someone's just bad, effectively. It doesn't really, the sophistication of an argument typically doesn't go much beyond that point. But again, I guess that's also a product just of most of us not taking the world and the things in it particularly seriously at any given moment. That what they know and what they say is true and what they think is true, mattering, being valued, again at any given moment. And I guess that leads to the idea of division and divisiveness. I mentioned earlier that, and started this off with the idea that social media is making us more connected, has made us more connected. And that's undoubtedly true at, let's say, a one-on-one level, or maybe within your local community in terms of being able to talk to and engage with your friends and family. But on a broader spectrum, when we consider all of the things that I just said, the nature of how we communicate on social media with just text and an absence of the human element to it, the fragmenting of information and the bias towards negative information, and then the proliferation of sensationalist headlines and the misappropriation of content and the ease with which you're able to do that is driving us towards a level of disconnect that I think is quite unusual. I haven't been alive probably long enough to draw parallels between now and, let's say, some of the more ideologically rampant times of the 20th century, with in the midst of the communist or fascist movements in Europe and America, as well as other places. But it's created this reactive tendency, I think, to, well, a reactive tendency to treat people that have a different opinion to us as the enemy, and to not try to find common ground, and to not look for the depth or the complexity of the difference in opinions, and then to understand fundamentally why it is that people have different opinions at a psychological level, at a neurobiological level, and just that the nature of observing facts isn't, it's not a one-on-one. You don't just see facts. The facts just aren't there. It's more complicated than that. People see different facts, different truths, so to speak. And certainly at a political level, it's driving us apart, particularly in places like America, but I think also in Australia that this is true too. It's destroying our desire to talk and to be able to communicate, again, because you can't communicate on these platforms. And I think that bleeds into real life, hopefully not too much, and I think that's hopefully something we can bolster against, but that bleeds into real life. Yeah. It certainly creates a lack of tolerance, a tolerance for each other, tolerance for a diversity of view, tolerance for diversity of opinion. I think that generally it fosters and has been fostering a cultural inclination towards intolerance in the name of tolerance, like we see with current debates on race, on gender, equity, diversity, inclusion, critical race theory, all of these postmodernist-based ideologies that fundamentally deny the idea of objectivism and are more relativist and subjectivist and socially constructivist in nature, which I won't get into now. It's a topic for a different episode, I think. I'm not sure what more there is to say on that topic, just in that it's present, but it's something that perhaps the reason of the point behind this whole episode is just that we should be more aware of social media and its influence and what it is that it's doing to us and what it can do to us and how it works on our biases and our prejudices, and how it will incline us to be intolerant and to drive each other apart more than together, than to pull us together, when that certainly doesn't need to be the case for our interactions. Something that's maybe worth touching on as well is for a younger audience in particular, is how it's changed our standards, our perceptions, or this idea that it has changed our body standards and our perceptions when it comes to health in particular, and perhaps mental health too, but physical health. And this is likely a bit of a contentious topic, because it firstly speaks to the idea that body image attraction beauty, aesthetics, that these are, well, it begs the question, are these things socially constructed, or are they more evolutionarily determined? And if you're someone who has an epistemological stance that believes in the validity of the scientific approach and the work that's been done in the realm of evolutionary psychology in terms of not just natural selection but sexual selection, then you'll know and believe that beauty standards are not socially constructed, and it's not something that we just decided one day that either women should be very thin or that they should have a big ass and big breasts, and that's something that we somehow top-down decided as a society, as men, likely as patriarchal men, and imposed upon the other half of the population. Or from a matriarchal perspective, that men with defined abdominals, big shoulders, and a V-tapered waist are inherently more attractive than others. The roots of these predilections towards certain things are deeply ingrained in our biology and our psychology. They manifest as children, as newborn babies, and well, that's just that. So now, getting back to the point of social media. Firstly, the idea that this has changed our beauty standards is maybe not true at some level, in that we have always, the things that we find beautiful about men and women, respectively, have always been the case. But the idea perhaps that we are always beautiful, or that we are beautiful to a certain extent, is maybe being overemphasized in an unrealistic fashion on social media. Now, the problem here, though, is that that's something that everyone is complicit in. It's not just men that are complicit in it, and it's not just women that are complicit in it. Men and women are complicit in encouraging false, let's say, levels of beauty amongst the population that we should be aiming for and desire for in women, and men and women are also doing that in men. Particularly in men with the fitness industry is something to answer for, with the use of steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, and passing that off as being natural, something that's naturally achievable. And that's getting better. That's something that people are more open about, thankfully, but there's still, I think, work to be done there. So social media certainly has something to answer for in how it creates the idea that we should all be beautiful to a certain standard all the time, though I'm not against encouraging physical, the reach towards, let's say, physical beauty or aesthetics, because that typically means becoming healthier, and that's always going to be a net positive to someone's life. Or it can be negative if it depends on how that's framed and gone about, but in terms of how it maybe is creating false standards, and if any one particular gender or sex is encouraging that, then I think that's simply not true. Or if it's true, it's a situation in which everyone is liable. So to wrap up this conversation about social media, this consideration of social media, we might want to say something along these lines. That social media undoubtedly allows us to be more connected with others than we were before. But it offers perverse incentives while doing so. It's not just about personal communication. It's about communication at a broader level, at the level of the community and at the cultural level. And it is something that we want to be aware of. We want to be aware of how we're receiving communication on social media, what kind of communication it is that we're receiving, how that might be playing into our personal biases, and we may be in a information silo in that sense, that may be inadvertently making us more bigoted and less predisposed to ideas that are true but which don't make us feel particularly good, or they don't support our current value system or beliefs or identity, that it is fragmenting our attention at any given moment. It is drawing us away from the real world and sucking our souls into our phones. It's destroying, in that sense, it's destroying our ability to focus, to be present, to be happy, I think. Not to mention, as I mentioned before, our ability to communicate effectively with one another and our proclivity now to engage in a form of conversation that we are not evolved for, that which we cannot navigate well, and which is likely to lead to just abject misery. Had personal experience with this myself, and I'm sure it's something it's just everyone has in the past, ubiquitous. And that beyond these points, we should be mindful of how social media, particularly platforms like Instagram, are creating a beauty standard that is not necessarily realistic. Not realistic for ourselves, and not necessarily realistic in what we should expect of others. And to perhaps follow that up, if you're a Twitter user or a Twitterer or someone that uses Reddit or any of these things, that we should be careful in how it inclines us to be an asshole, basically. To simply dig in our heels, to ignore the arguments and ideas and the humanness of the other side, and to not try to reach out and make any real attempt at connection and understanding, and just to instead act as a siloing gratification box where we are sent false signals by people that share the same view as us, and that make us believe that then that view must be inherently correct. So for anyone who has made it this far, I congratulate you on your effort. It's been a long slog for me, and almost certainly a harder, longer slog for you. And I'll leave you with this, just as the sun's coming out and the birds are starting to chirp. See you next time.